Have you ever been judged for something small, something that meant the world to you? Imagine saving every penny, literally, for months, just to make a loved one's dream come true, only to face rejection in front of a crowd. That's exactly what happened to Arthur Bennett, a 78-year-old widower in the quiet town of Oak Ridge. For over 4 decades, Arthur, a retired postal worker, had lived in the same modest home where he once laughed with his late wife, Margaret. Now, his days were filled with tending to his tiny garden of daisies and waiting for Thursdays, when his only granddaughter, Lily, would visit. At 78, Arthur's pension barely covered his bills. His son, Daniel, and daughter-in-law, Sarah, worked long hours at low-paying jobs, leaving little room for extras. But Lily, with her bright smile, had become Arthur's entire world since Margaret's passing 3 years ago. Every morning, he'd rise at dawn, brew a simple cup of tea, and read the Oak Ridge Gazette cover to cover, savoring the quiet moments. Arthur was known in Oak Ridge as the man who always cleared the snow from his elderly neighbor's walkway before his own, even on the coldest winter days. He donated $5 each month to the local animal shelter, a small but steady gift he never missed. And he had a unique habit. Every time he received change, he'd drop the pennies into a large glass jar on his kitchen counter. "A penny saved is a penny earned," he'd say with a wistful smile, a lesson his father taught him during the lean years of his childhood. For Arthur, those pennies weren't just coins. They were tiny promises of something better. Lily's 9th birthday was just around the corner, and Arthur knew exactly what she wanted: the fairy castle cake from Harper's Bakery, the best in town. At $42.95, it was a luxury far beyond Arthur's means, but Lily had stared at it through the bakery window for months, her eyes sparkling with wonder. Her parents could only afford a small toy this year, so Arthur made it his mission to give Lily the birthday of her dreams. For 6 months, he'd saved every penny, even picking up stray ones he found on the sidewalks during his daily walks, each coin a step closer to seeing Lily's face light up. Now, imagine you're Arthur. You've spent months collecting pennies, your hands trembling with excitement as you count them one last time. $42.95, exactly. You dress in your best sweater, the one Margaret always loved, and walk 8 blocks to the bakery, your knees aching with every step. You're so close to making your granddaughter's dream come true. But what happens next? Will the bakery accept your jar of pennies with a smile, or will they turn you away, leaving you humiliated in front of a crowd? Comment below with your choice. Option 1. The bakery accepts your pennies with kindness, or Option 2. They reject you, citing their busy schedule. Let us know what you think. And if you love stories that tug at your heartstrings, don't forget to like and subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories for more incredible tales every week. Each penny Arthur saved felt like a whisper of hope, a tiny piece of magic for Lily's special day. On the morning of her birthday, he woke earlier than usual, his heart racing with anticipation. He counted the pennies one last time, placing them carefully in a clean jar, the glass cool against his weathered hands. The soft clink of each coin echoed in the quiet kitchen, a sound that had become a comforting ritual over the past 6 months. Dressed in his best sweater, the faded blue one Margaret had knitted for him decades ago, he set out for Harper's Bakery. The 8-block walk felt longer with every step as his arthritic knees protested, the pain a sharp reminder of his age. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and the faint sweetness of chimney smoke from nearby homes. Arthur's mind drifted to Lily's laughter, imagining her joy when she saw the fairy castle cake, its delicate sugar flowers and fairy figurines sparkling under the party lights. He clutched the jar tighter, the weight of it grounding him against the ache in his legs and the flutter of nerves in his chest. Harper's Bakery was buzzing with the morning rush when Arthur arrived, the bell above the door jingling softly as he stepped inside. The warmth of the bakery enveloped him, a stark contrast to the chilly October air outside. The scent of freshly baked bread and cinnamon rolls filled the space, mingling with the hum of conversation and the clatter of coffee cups. Young professionals sipped lattes, their briefcases resting at their feet. Parents ordered treats for school events, their children tugging at their sleeves, and businesspeople grabbed pastries on the go, their eyes glued to their phones. Behind the counter stood Clara, a 19-year-old college student working part-time. Her focus was on speed, keeping the line moving, the orders flowing, her hands a blur as she rang up purchases and handed out paper bags. Arthur waited patiently, the jar of pennies clutched tightly in his hands, its weight a comforting reminder of his mission. He watched the line dwindle, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and anxiety. When his turn came, he stepped forward with a warm smile, his voice trembling with pride. "Good morning," he said softly, the words catching in his throat. "I'd like to order the fairy castle cake, please, the one in the display." Clara nodded, her tone brisk but polite, her eyes barely meeting his as she punched the order into the register. "Of course, sir. That'll be $42.95. Arthur set the jar on the counter, his hands shaking slightly, the glass making a soft thud against the wooden surface. "I've been saving up," he explained, a glimmer of pride in his eyes, his voice steadying as he spoke. "I've got it counted exactly, $42.95 in pennies." Clara's smile froze as she stared at the jar, the copper coins glinting under the bakery's bright lights, a sea of tiny, tarnished promises. The line behind Arthur was growing longer, and a sharply dressed businessman tapped his foot, glancing at his watch with a scowl. Two women in line whispered to each other, their voices carrying a hint of judgment, their words sharp like the edge of a knife. "Sir," Clara said, her tone sharpening, her brow furrowing in disbelief. "You can't seriously expect us to count all these pennies. We're swamped right now." Arthur's hands trembled more noticeably, his heart sinking like a stone in a cold, dark river. The warmth of the bakery suddenly felt stifling, the air thick with the weight of his embarrassment. I counted them carefully," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper, his throat tightening as he fought to keep his composure. "It's all there, I promise. Do you take cards or larger bills instead?" Clara's voice rose, loud enough for the whole bakery to hear, her words slicing through the hum of the crowd. "We can't accept this many coins during rush hour. It'll take forever." Arthur's cheeks burned with embarrassment, the weight of the stairs around him pressing down like a heavy fog, each glance a silent judgment. It's my granddaughter's birthday," he whispered, his voice cracking, the words barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. "I've been saving these pennies for months." Arthur's mind raced, a flood of memories crashing over him like waves on a rocky shore. He saw Lily's face, her wide eyes sparkling as she pressed her nose against the bakery window months ago, whispering, "Grandpa, that's the most beautiful cake I've ever seen." He remembered the way her tiny hand had slipped into his, her trust in him absolute, her belief that he could make her birthday magical. Now, standing in the bakery, he felt that trust slipping through his fingers like sand. His chest tightened, a sharp pang of fear gripping him. What if he couldn't give her this one small joy? What if he let her down, just as he'd felt he'd let Margaret down in her final days? Unable to ease her pain, the jar of pennies, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a burden, a cruel reminder of his limitations. The bakery grew tense, the air thick with impatience, the hum of conversation replaced by an uneasy silence. The businessman behind Arthur sighed loudly, his voice dripping with irritation, his polished shoes tapping an impatient rhythm on the tile floor. "Some of us have places to be," he muttered, checking his gold watch again, the glint of it catching the light. A woman in a sleek blazer nodded in agreement, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "This is absurd. It's 2025. Who even uses pennies anymore?" Clara's supervisor, Evelyn, a stern woman with sharp features, approached with quick steps, her heels clicking like a metronome, her name tag identifying her as the manager. "What's the problem?" she asked, her eyes narrowing at the jar of pennies, her lips pursing in disapproval. "This gentleman wants to pay for a cake entirely in pennies," Clara explained, her tone laced with disbelief, the word entirely hanging in the air like an accusation. "Thousands of them," someone in line added, their voice tinged with mockery. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze cold and unyielding. "Sir, I'm sorry, but we can't process this many coins during business hours. It would disrupt our entire operation," she said, her voice cold and professional, each word a brick in the wall she was building between Arthur and his dream. "Perhaps you could take these to a bank and come back with bills." Arthur stood frozen, the judgmental stares boring into his back, each one a needle pricking at his pride. His cheeks flushed deeper, a wave of shame washing over him, hot and suffocating. The bank was on the other side of town. A long walk his knees couldn't handle today, the thought of it sending a fresh jolt of pain through his legs. Lily's birthday party was in just 3 hours, and the image of her waiting for him, her eyes bright with expectation, made his stomach churn with dread. "I don't drive anymore," he explained softly, his voice trembling, the words barely escaping his lips. "And the cake, it's for today? My granddaughter's 9th birthday." Evelyn crossed her arms, unmoved, her posture rigid as a statue. "That's not our concern, sir. We have a business to run. Our policy clearly states." Her words were cut off by a sharp voice from the line, a voice that carried the weight of years and wisdom. "For goodness sake." An elderly woman with silver hair, likely in her early 70s, stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. Beatrice Harper, a retired schoolteacher who had taught in Oak Ridge for over 40 years, wore a simple lavender dress, the fabric soft and worn, and carried herself with quiet authority, her eyes sharp with conviction. "I remember when businesses cared about their customers, not just their bottom line," she said, her voice firm as she addressed Evelyn, her words cutting through the tension like a knife through butter. "When I was a girl, people helped each other. This man clearly worked hard to save these pennies. Where's your compassion?" Evelyn's expression hardened, her jaw tightening, but Beatrice didn't waver. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we have other customers to serve," Evelyn replied, her tone clipped, her arms still crossed like a shield. Beatrice's eyes flashed with determination, her voice rising slightly. "And they can wait 2 minutes. When did we become so impatient that we can't spare a moment for an elderly man?" The businessman scoffed, checking his watch again, his impatience palpable. "Some of us have real jobs to get to," he said dismissively, his voice dripping with condescension. Beatrice turned to him, her gaze piercing, her words sharp and unyielding. "And some of us have real hearts to listen with." The exchange hung in the air, a fragile thread of hope amidst the growing tension. Arthur's heart pounded, torn between gratitude for Beatrice's support and the sinking realization that it might not be enough. What if Evelyn refused to budge? What if he had to walk away, his jar of pennies a useless weight in his hands? The thought of facing Lily without the cake, of seeing her smile fade, was almost too much to bear. He glanced at the fairy castle cake in the display, its delicate details mocking him with their unattainable beauty, and a lump formed in his throat. The bakery seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Evelyn's next move, the silence stretching taut like a bowstring. Despite Beatrice's words, Evelyn stood firm, her resolve unshaken. Company policy states we're not required to accept excessive coinage. "It's simply impractical," she said, her voice as cold as the autumn wind outside. Arthur stared at his jar of pennies, each one a memory of bending down on aching knees to pick up a stray coin, each one a piece of his love for Lily, each one now a symbol of his failure. His hands tightened around the jar as he made a decision, the weight of it pulling at his already stooped shoulders. "I understand," he said, his voice heavy with quiet dignity, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "I don't want to cause any more trouble." His voice cracked on the last word, betraying the depth of his disappointment, a raw edge of emotion that echoed through the bakery. He turned to leave, his shoulders slumped lower than when he'd entered, the fairy castle cake sitting in the display case, its delicate sugar flowers and fairy figurines now a distant dream, a mirage he could never reach. Outside, dark clouds gathered, promising rain. A cold, lonely walk home with nothing to show for his efforts, the drops already beginning to patter against the bakery's windows, each one a tear he refused to shed. As Arthur shuffled toward the door, his thoughts spiraled into a storm of regret, each step heavier than the last. He thought to himself, "I've failed her," picturing Lily's face falling when he arrived empty-handed, her bright eyes dimming with disappointment. The image of her disappointed gaze burned in his mind, a sharp ache in his chest that rivaled the pain in his knees. The jar felt heavier now, not with pennies, but with the weight of his broken promise, each coin a reminder of the months he'd spent dreaming of this moment, only to have it slip away. His mind drifted to Margaret, her voice echoing in his memory, soft and encouraging. "You always find a way, Arthur." But today, he couldn't. and the guilt of that failure wrapped around him like a shroud. He imagined the rain soaking through his sweater, the cold seeping into his bones, a fitting punishment for letting Lily down. The bell above the door loomed closer, its jingle a final note of defeat. Beatrice called after him, her voice fierce, her words a lifeline in the storm of his despair. "Don't you let them treat you this way. I'll count those pennies myself if I have to." But Arthur kept walking, the public humiliation too heavy to bear, the weight of the crowd's stares pressing down on him like a physical force. His shoes felt like they were filled with lead, each step a struggle against the tears threatening to spill, his vision blurring as he reached for the door handle. Just as his hand touched the cold metal, a voice rang out, clear and determined, slicing through the tension like a ray of sunlight through the clouds. "Wait!" Everyone turned to see the source, their heads swiveling in unison, the bakery's hum replaced by a collective intake of breath. It was Ethan Carter, a 20-year-old cashier who had only been at Harper's for 3 weeks. With warm brown eyes and a quiet resolve, Ethan had been restocking croissants, watching the scene unfold in silence, his hands still dusted with flour from the morning's baking. "I'll count them," he said, his voice steady despite his youth, his words carrying a weight that belied his age. "I can do it at the second register." Evelyn's eyes widened, then narrowed, her posture stiffening. "Ethan, that's not necessary. The gentleman can return with proper payment," she said, her tone sharp, her arms crossing tighter over her chest. Ethan stood taller, his jaw set, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet defiance. "My register isn't being used right now. It won't disrupt the main line." "This isn't about the register," Evelyn snapped, her voice rising, the sharpness of it cutting through the bakery's warmth. "It's about precedent and efficiency. If we do this for him, everyone will think they can what?" Ethan interrupted, his voice cutting through the tension, surprising even himself with its strength. "Pay with legal U.S. currency." He turned to Arthur, his expression softening, his eyes warm with understanding. "Sir, I'd be happy to count your pennies. Please, come over to my register. Let's pause for a moment. What would you do if this was your father or grandfather, humiliated like this? Would you stand by, or would you step up like Ethan? Type, "I would help" in the comments if you believe seniors deserve respect, not impatience." Arthur hesitated, glancing between Ethan's kind face and Evelyn's stern disapproval, his heart caught between hope and fear. The businessman sighed dramatically, his impatience boiling over. "Oh, for heaven's sake, just let the kid count the pennies so we can all move on," he muttered, his voice a mix of exasperation and reluctant agreement. Beatrice smiled at Ethan, her eyes warm with approval, her hands clasped in front of her. "Now there's a young man raised right." Ethan led Arthur to the second register, clearing a space for the jar, his movements deliberate and calm. "This is for your granddaughter, right?" he asked, his voice gentle, a soft smile playing on his lips. Arthur nodded, his eyes misty, the tears he'd fought so hard to hold back now threatening to spill over. "Lily, she's turning 9 today. She's been dreaming of this cake for months." The main line continued at Clara's register, the hum of the bakery resuming, but all eyes were on Ethan and Arthur at the second register. Ethan began counting the pennies, his movements slow and deliberate, the soft clink of copper filling the air like a quiet melody. He stacked them in neat piles of 10, then grouped the stacks, his fingers moving with care, each coin a testament to Arthur's love for his granddaughter. Some customers watched curiously, their expressions softening as they took in the scene. Others showed thinly veiled annoyance, their sighs and muttered complaints a low undercurrent. The businessman checked his phone, muttering under his breath, his impatience a stark contrast to Ethan's calm focus. Evelyn stood at her post, arms crossed, her frown deepening as she glanced at her watch every few minutes, her heels tapping an impatient rhythm on the tile floor. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ethan counted aloud, his focus unwavering, his voice steady and soothing. Arthur whispered, guilt heavy in his voice, his eyes darting to Evelyn's stern expression. "Your manager doesn't look happy with you. You don't have to do this, son. I don't want you getting in trouble because of an old man." Ethan didn't break his rhythm, his hands steady as he continued stacking the pennies. $7.60 so far, he announced, then looked up with a warm smile, his eyes meeting Arthur's with a quiet reassurance. My grandfather raised me after my parents passed. He worked as a janitor at the middle school his whole life to give me a better future. Worked through arthritis, just like yours. Ethan gestured to Arthur's swollen knuckles, his voice softening, a note of reverence in his tone. I remember him counting pennies for my school trip, smiling through the pain, saying, "Every cent's a chance to care." He taught me that how we treat people matters more than convenience. Arthur's heart swelled at Ethan's words, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest, a warmth that spread through him like the first rays of sunlight after a long, cold night. He thought of Lily, her tiny hands helping him plant daisies in the garden, her laughter like music on those quiet Thursdays, her voice bright as she chattered about her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. "She's smart as a whip," he said, his voice brightening, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips despite the tears in his eyes. "Last week, she brought home a science project about butterflies, got an A+. She wants to be a veterinarian someday, says she'll take care of all the animals in Oak Ridge." Ethan smiled, stacking another pile, the soft clink of the pennies a steady rhythm between them. $10.25 now, he announced, his voice a quiet anchor in the storm of Arthur's emotions. Beatrice, who had purchased her items but stayed to watch, nodded approvingly, her lavender dress catching the light as she leaned against the counter. "Young man, you're a credit to your generation," she called to Ethan, her voice warm with pride. He smiled but kept counting, his focus unwavering. $16.72. The businessman approached the counter, his impatience boiling over, his polished shoes gleaming under the bakery's lights. "This is ridiculous. How much longer will this take?" he demanded, his voice sharp, his watch glinting as he checked the time again. "As long as it needs to," Ethan replied, his voice calm but firm, his eyes never leaving the pennies. $20.46 now. A little girl in line tugged on her mother's sleeve, her voice carrying through the bakery, innocent and clear. "Mommy, why is that man counting all those pennies? Is it because he's too poor for paper money?" The bakery fell silent, the question hanging in the air like a fragile glass ornament, ready to shatter. Arthur's cheeks flushed a deep red, his hands retreating to his pockets, his shoulders hunching as if to shield himself from the words. Ethan answered before the mother could, his tone gentle, his voice a soothing balm. "No, sweetheart. This gentleman saved these pennies for his granddaughter's birthday. Each one shows how much he loves her. That makes these pennies more valuable than any paper money." The girl nodded thoughtfully, her eyes wide with understanding. "Like when I draw pictures for Nana instead of buying her stuff?" "Exactly like that," Ethan said, continuing his count, his hands steady despite the weight of the moment. $25.13. Evelyn approached again, her heels clicking sharply on the tile floor, each step a warning drumbeat, her voice clipped and professional. "Ethan, your break was supposed to start 15 minutes ago. I need you to wrap this up. Now," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at the growing stack of pennies. Ethan didn't look up, his hands continuing their steady rhythm. "I'll skip my break today. I'm at $25.43, he said, his voice calm but resolute, a quiet defiance in his posture. Evelyn's voice rose, a warning edge to it, her arms crossing tighter over her chest. "That's not how breaks work. They're legally mandated, and we have inventory to finish before closing." $27, Ethan continued, ignoring her, his focus unwavering, the soft clink of the pennies a steady counterpoint to her rising frustration. Evelyn's tone turned icy, her words sharp enough to cut glass. "Ethan, this is your final warning. One more penny, and you're fired. I mean it." The threat hung in the air, the bakery's atmosphere crackling with tension, the customers shifting uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Ethan and Evelyn. What would Ethan do? Would he risk his job for a stranger, or would he back down, leaving Arthur to walk away empty-handed? The question lingered, unanswered, the silence stretching taut like a wire about to snap. Beatrice made a disapproving sound, her lips pursing, her hands tightening around her purse. Arthur's face fell, his voice breaking, the words spilling out in a rush of guilt and desperation. "Please, young man, don't risk your job. I'll figure something else out for Lily. Maybe a grocery store cake will do." Ethan paused, his hand hovering over the pennies, his brow furrowing as he weighed his options. He looked at Arthur's hopeful, weathered face, the lines etched deep with years of struggle and love. Then at the fairy castle cake in the display, its delicate sugar flowers and fairy figurines waiting to make a little girl's dream come true. He pictured Lily's disappointed face if she received a plain grocery store cake instead, her birthday dimmed by her grandfather's failure, her smile fading as she tried to hide her sadness. The image was a knife to his heart, a reminder of the times his own grandfather had sacrificed for him, working through pain to give him a better life. After a moment of internal struggle, Ethan reached for his wallet, his movements slow but deliberate, his decision made. "I can't let you do that," Arthur said, his hand reaching out to stop him, his voice trembling with emotion. "That's your hard-earned money." But Ethan had already pulled out two $20 bills and a $5, the bills crisp and green against the worn wood of the counter. "I'd like to purchase the fairy castle cake," he told Evelyn, placing the bills on the counter, his voice firm, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet resolve. "Ethan, you can't," Evelyn began, her voice sharp, but Ethan cut her off, his tone unyielding. "It's my money, and I'd like to buy this cake for Mr. Bennett's granddaughter." Evelyn stared at him, conflict flickering in her eyes, her hands clenching at her sides. Finally, she took the money and processed the payment, her voice tight, her movements jerky with suppressed frustration. "This doesn't mean you can skip your break. I'll need to speak with you later," she said, handing him the receipt, her eyes flashing with a warning. As she walked away, her heels clicking sharply, Arthur's eyes filled with tears, the weight of Ethan's kindness overwhelming him. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, the words trembling with gratitude. Ethan pocketed the receipt, his expression soft, his voice warm with sincerity. "Because someday, I might be the one counting pennies for someone I love." He turned to get the cake, but Arthur stopped him, his hand trembling, his touch light but firm. "I can't accept this. I've always paid my own way. Always, even in the hardest times." The jar of pennies sat between them, only half counted, a symbol of Arthur's determination and love for Lily, its copper contents glinting softly in the bakery's light. Ethan considered for a moment, then smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Let's make a deal. I'll buy the cake, but you pay me back with these pennies when you have time to count them properly. You can bring them to the bakery whenever it's convenient," he said, his voice gentle, his offer a bridge between Arthur's pride and his need. Let's pause again, because this moment is so powerful. How can people treat an elderly man this way when he's just trying to do something special for his granddaughter? If this was your father or grandfather being humiliated, what would you do? Imagine saving pennies for months, only to be mocked and turned away. Is this how we should treat seniors who gave their lives for our country? Type respect in the comments if you believe our seniors deserve better. What neither Ethan nor the customers at Harper's Bakery knew was that Arthur Bennett wasn't just a retired postal worker. 43 years earlier, Arthur had served as a combat medic in Vietnam during the Battle of Khe Sanh. Under enemy fire, he had saved 14 men in his unit, carrying them one by one to safety, even after taking a bullet to his leg. The memory of that day still haunted him. The screams of his comrades, the stench of gunpowder, the searing pain in his leg as he dragged each man to safety, his hands slick with blood. For his bravery, Arthur had received the Bronze Star for valor, but he never displayed it or spoke of it, the weight of those memories too heavy to bear. To him, he had simply done what was right, what any man would do for his brothers. After the war, he returned to Oak Ridge, choosing a quiet life of service as a mail carrier, becoming a beloved figure in his community, his daily routes a steady rhythm of connection and care. Few knew of his military past. He preferred it that way, the hero's mantle too heavy for his humble shoulders. Arthur had buried those memories deep, locking them away in a drawer alongside the Bronze Star, its ribbon faded with time. But in moments like this, when he felt small and powerless, the ghosts of Khe Sanh whispered to him, reminding him of the strength he'd once had, the courage that had carried him through the darkest of days. He wondered if that courage had faded with age, if the man who had braved enemy fire was now too weak to brave a bakery line. The thought brought a fresh wave of shame, a bitter taste in his mouth, but Ethan's kindness had sparked a flicker of something else. hope, perhaps, or the memory of who he used to be. One of the men Arthur had saved was James Carter, now the mayor of Oak Ridge. James had never forgotten the young medic who dragged him to safety, his own blood staining the jungle floor, his voice hoarse as he shouted for Arthur to leave him and save himself. For years, he had searched for Arthur to thank him, but Arthur's common name and humble nature made him hard to find, a quiet shadow in a bustling world. As Ethan carefully boxed the fairy castle cake, its delicate details now within reach, the bakery door chimed, a soft sound that cut through the hum of the crowd. A tall man in a tailored suit entered, Mayor James Carter, stopping for his usual afternoon coffee, his presence commanding attention. He waited in line, his eyes drawn to the scene at the second register. A young cashier helping an elderly man, a jar of pennies between them, the air around them charged with a quiet intensity. There was something familiar about the older man's profile that tugged at James's memory, a ghost from a past he'd never forgotten. Arthur turned to leave with the cake, his steps slow and heavy, the weight of the day still pressing on him, the box in his hands a fragile victory. He was nearly at the door, the bell above it glinting in the light, when the mayor's voice rang out, sharp and urgent, a single word that stopped him in his tracks. Arthur. The bakery fell silent, all eyes turning to the mayor as he stepped out of line, his coffee forgotten, his polished shoes clicking on the tile floor. Arthur turned, confusion etched on his face, his brow furrowing as he tried to place the well-dressed man approaching him, his heart pounding with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Who was this man, and why did his voice carry such weight? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the bakery held its breath, waiting for the next moment to unfold. "It's James," the mayor said, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "James Carter. Key San, 1968. Recognition dawned on Arthur's face, his eyes widening, a gasp escaping his lips. "My God," he whispered, the name a key unlocking a flood of memories. "Little Jimmy Carter." The two men embraced, the mayor's crisp suit a stark contrast to Arthur's worn sweater, their arms tight around each other as the years melted away. "I've been looking for you for years," James said, stepping back to look at his rescuer, his hands gripping Arthur's shoulders as if to confirm he was real. "After the war, you just disappeared." Arthur shrugged, his modesty unshaken, his voice soft and humble. "I came home, got a job delivering mail, started a family. Nothing special." James's voice rose, filled with emotion, his words echoing through the bakery. "Nothing special? This man saved my life, and the lives of 13 others, during one of the worst battles in Vietnam. He carried me half a mile with a bullet in his own leg." The bakery patrons stared in stunned silence, their earlier impatience replaced by awe. Evelyn stepped forward, her stern demeanor faltering, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them in front of her. "You're a war hero?" she asked, her voice soft, a crack in her professional facade. Arthur shifted uncomfortably, the attention a heavy weight on his shoulders. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," James said firmly, turning to the crowd, his voice steady and commanding. "Not what anyone would have done, what a hero does." This man received the Bronze Star for valor, and when he came home, he asked for nothing, expected nothing, just served his community quietly for decades. Ethan stood still, the cake box in his hands, absorbing the revelation about the humble man who had been counting pennies for his granddaughter, his own eyes misty with emotion. The businessman who had been so impatient stepped forward, his expression chastened, his earlier arrogance replaced by humility. "Sir, it would be my honor to pay for that cake," he said, his voice sincere, his hand reaching for his wallet. Arthur began to protest, his pride flaring, but others joined in, their voices a chorus of gratitude. "Let us do this, please. It's the least we can do for everything you've done." Within moments, customers were opening their wallets, pressing bills into Arthur's hands despite his protests, their generosity a wave that lifted him from the depths of his earlier despair. The businessman handed Ethan his credit card, his voice loud and clear. "And 20 cakes for the veterans' home," he announced, his words carrying through the bakery, a promise of redemption. That afternoon, Lily's birthday party became a day to remember. Not only did she receive her dream fairy castle cake, but her grandfather arrived in style, escorted by Mayor James Carter in his official car. James announced a new community initiative in Arthur's honor, the Arthur Bennett Veteran Support Fund, with an initial donation of $50,000 from his office to help veterans in need. The businessman, revealed to be a regional bank executive named Robert Hayes, pledged matching funds and launched a program to assist elderly veterans with financial planning. Ethan's act of kindness didn't go unnoticed. The story of the young cashier who stood up for an elderly veteran spread like wildfire through Oak Ridge. 3 days later, the owner of Harper's Bakery, who had been away during the incident, personally promoted Ethan to assistant manager with a significant raise. Evelyn, reflecting on her actions, offered a heartfelt apology to both Arthur and Ethan. "I was so focused on efficiency that I forgot about humanity," she admitted, her voice heavy with regret, her eyes downcast as she spoke. "I won't make that mistake again." Later, as she sat alone in the bakery after closing, she replayed her words, thinking of her own grandparents' struggles and how she'd lost sight of what truly mattered, a quiet promise to herself to do better. The jar of pennies remained at Harper's Bakery, but with a new purpose. It became the first collection jar for the Arthur Bennett Veteran Support Fund, a small plaque beside it reading, "No contribution is too small. No act of kindness is ever wasted." Each Thursday, Arthur and Lily visited the bakery together, Ethan greeting them with a warm smile and often a free cookie for Lily. The three would sit by the window, Arthur sharing stories of his postal routes, carefully avoiding the war tales he still found hard to discuss. One Thursday, Lily brought something special to show Ethan, her grandfather's bronze star, preserved in its original case despite decades in a drawer. "Grandpa says true heroes don't need to show off medals," she said with a child's wisdom, her voice bright and clear. "He says real heroes are people like you, who do the right thing even when it's hard." Ethan knelt to her level, his eyes soft, his voice warm with emotion. "Your grandfather taught me something that day, Lily. Sometimes the most valuable things in life aren't about money at all." Arthur smiled, watching his granddaughter and the young man who had restored his faith in the younger generation, his heart full in a way it hadn't been since Margaret's passing. "Pennies and kindness," he said softly, his voice warm with gratitude, the words a quiet mantra. "Both seem small on their own, but save enough of them, and you can change a life." In the months that followed, Harper's Bakery became known across the region for its penny payment day, held once a month, where customers could pay entirely in pennies, with each coin going to the Veterans Fund. What had begun as a moment of shame for an elderly man transformed into a community tradition celebrating service, sacrifice, and the power of simple human kindness. This story reminds us that the smallest acts of compassion can ripple outward, touching lives in ways we can't imagine. Arthur's journey, from humiliation to honor, shows us the courage it takes to keep going, even when the world turns its back. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of forgiveness, and the hope that kindness can still thrive in a fast-paced world. We all have the chance to be an Ethan, to stand up for what's right, to honor those who've given so much, like our veterans and seniors, whose sacrifices built the world we live in today. Have you ever witnessed a small act of kindness that changed someone's day, or even their life? Maybe you've been the one to offer a helping hand when no one else would. Share your story in the comments below, and let's inspire each other to keep kindness alive. Better yet, take a moment today to do something small for a veteran or senior in your community. Maybe donate a penny to a local fund in their honor. Small acts matter more than you know. In the end, Arthur's jar of pennies became a symbol of something far greater than money. It became a beacon of hope, a reminder that no act of kindness is ever too small. Harper's Bakery, once a place of rejection, became a hub of community and compassion, all because one young man chose humanity over efficiency. At Daily Narrated Stories, we're committed to bringing you real, life-changing stories like this every week. Stories that remind us of the power of hope, courage, and connection. If you believe in honoring our veterans and seniors with the respect they deserve, don't wait. Subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories right now. Time is fleeting, and these stories of extraordinary kindness won't wait for you. Join our community today, type "respect" in the comments, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we can keep kindness alive, one story at a time. Don't miss out. Subscribe now and be part of something truly special with daily narrated stories.